All right, defining the system. So in the new modal distance system, intervals are labeled using 2 data points. So if you were like a plumber or a woodworker or anyone doing a normal measurement, you're just trying to measure a map, you're a gamer and you're trying to see how far it is in Zelda or whatever the new games are. I don't even know. I played Zelda way back, before it was even online or anything, right? You're trying to figure out the distances between one thing and another. So it's the number of half steps. That would be like miles on a map. You're looking, half steps are the distance term. The number of modal half steps, that would be similar to if we had inches versus like a foot. So we have 2 units of measure, noting that that second unit of measure isn't perfect because it's not uniform. It's dependent upon where you are in the collection of notes that will be in order. But these are the 2 units of distance that make sense within our measurement tool that we can try to combine together. What might it look like? What you have is really 2 units of measure. It's a 4-2 modal half steps. So notice our term before was a 4 note away major third. But the third represents a scale degree that counted the place that you started on. So all the scale degrees are really off by 1 from a measurement term. So if you see a third, really it's 2 modal half steps from that point. Now note that you don't really need to name the point. They call it a major third as though the major is telling you where you're measuring from. But that's not always true because you might not be measuring a major third from the 1 of a major scale. You might be measuring a major third from the 4th of a major scale or the 5th of a major scale. So the major isn't really giving you any more information. You could just call it might be better to call it a 4 note away major third. Or more precisely or accurately, using proper measurement like a plumber would do, it would be a 4 note away second modal half step, right? And so then in order to differentiate these 2 notes, we might as well put another letter. I don't want to put a major in between them. I might as well put the place that we are measuring from, which if it was a major scale, we call that the Ionian mode. From a Nashville number system, it would be the first. It would be 4 notes away from the first, and it would be a 2 modal half step up, which would be the third scale degree if we were thinking in scale degrees. So a lot of people are intimidated by the I here because they don't use Ionian. They basically see it as either a Nashville number system, which stays constant, or they're gonna see major and minor, and then possibly not work with the other modes much. But if you use a Nashville number system, notice that that's supposed to be easier. It kind of is because it's more logical. So if you replace this with a 1, you would basically be doing a Nashville number system kind of concept. I think it's easier to use the letters and has more functionality. So I think it's useful to learn the letters and the numbering system, which is an absolute numbering system. So this would give us 4 semitones forward from the Ionian. That's what that 4 stands for. 2 modal half steps. That's what that 2 stands for, which would be the third scale degree, because the third from a scale degree term is always off by 1. It's too high by 1, and it's equivalent to the third scale degree. So notice that each of these notations has meaning to it. So you could drop it down to just an Ionian second if you wanted to, which would be equivalent to the third scale degree, which would be a major third from the point of the Ionian. But I think naming the 4 is a useful thing to do, and it gives you every term here has meaning to it that's meaningful almost all contexts that you're working in. Now you might say, hey, look, what if I'm not working in the context of an Ionian mode? Note that you can make that argument no matter what kind of context you're adding, whether it be scale degrees or whether you be talking about modal half steps. In other words, you might be saying, hey, look, if I'm just measuring from this note to this note, why do I need to be adding then modal half steps? You don't, right? Because that's going to be giving you an added context. But you also don't need scale degrees. Why would I say it's a 4 note away major third? If I say it's a major third, the third is telling me that I'm in some kind of collection of notes, and this is the one of that collection of notes. So that's what the scale degree is doing. If that's not the case, we should just say it's 4 notes away. But it's nice to have that context because in Western music, we are almost always in some 7-note collection. There could be 12 different 7-note collections. The reason the scale degree is not as efficient as the context of a modal half step is because we're not always measuring from the one of that collection of notes. We always do have 7 notes that we're kind of working in Western music, and they're always in order. That's true, but we're not always measuring from the one. So that's where the problem is. So in this case, if I'm looking at this collection of notes, this is the 1, this is the 5. So I could use the context of measuring up something similar to scale degrees, but I don't need to make that the 1. I need to just say I'm going up in context, 2 notes up from the 7-note collection of notes that are in order. All right, why is it better than scale degree system? So the current scale degree system is off by 1 due to starting at 1 instead of 0. So if this is going to be our collection of notes, we have 12 notes in the musical alphabet, and we pick out 7 of them. We talked about how to do that in a prior presentation. So now we have 7 notes. We usually work in the key of C, but any of the other 12 collection of notes would be all the same. So don't let it throw you off that we're always using the same kind of notes. It's the same all the way across. Now, if I was to number these notes, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the problem is if I'm measuring from this C to this F, then what am I going to call that? I have to call that the 1 to say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. But it shouldn't be for distance. The distance should be 1, 2, 3. It's a 3-note distance from these, what I would call nodes or modal points, 3-note distance up. Now notice that the distance between all of these points is not the same, because if I go from this C to this D, I have a note in between, whereas if I go from this E to the F, I don't. So I have to know relative position of the node that I'm going from, but it's always going to be in the same order. So therefore, it still would make sense for us to identify the node that we're measuring from and then count up from that node, so that if I'm measuring from this F and I'm going up to this A, then I can still say it's a 2-note away modal half step, right? Instead of saying it's going to be, I have to make that F the 1 and say that this A is going to be a major third. It's not a major third from the F because the F is not the 1 in our collection of notes here. We want to keep an absolute numbering or natural numbering system, in which case it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, or the Lydian node. That's the problem. It causes all kinds of problems that you probably are dealing with as you're mapping out on your instrument, particularly on the guitar, but don't really understand why you're having this problem. Why am I jumping from scale to scale? Why am I making this the 1? Why can't I count this up, just in terms of distance perspective? So it requires redefining the root with every scale shift. So what does this cause you to do? This means every time you go to a different chord or a different part of the song, even though you're in the same overall shape, you end up renaming the shape and then thinking about the distances as though they're different distances. The distances between the 7 points on the map are always the same. We want to name it in such a way that we optimize that tool. They're always the same. On the piano, it's a little different because your fingering is different because it's not a symmetrical instrument. But on the guitar in particular, it's always the same. We want to maximize that. You must build a scale before you can measure from it. So in other words, if I'm measuring from this F, even though it's the same collection of notes, I have to make it the 1 to measure from this F to this A. Why would I have to do that? So I'm gonna make this a major third. So there's 2 terms that don't make sense there. I'm making it a third, and it should be 2 modal half steps up, and I'm calling it a major third, but it's not a major third because I'm measuring from this node. It's the 4th. I'm measuring from the 4th, so it's a Lydian, right? It's a Lydian distance. So even if I made this the 1, it still doesn't sound quite right to call that a major third from the 1 because this is the 1 of a Lydian mode, right? Which is a different collection of notes than an F major collection of notes. You see, all these problems are basically happening because of that off by 1 terminology. We shouldn't have any of those problems if we just measured from that point. So in contrast, the modal distance system only needs a fixed point, the mode center. So again, if you were to reconstruct the system, you would just say, hey, look, there's 7 nodes within the system, like 7 points on a map. They repeat, right? They repeat on the map up here, but the map is the map. I'm not going to, once I've identified my 12 different vantage points as the world is rotating around, then I'm going to keep the names on the map the same. If I'm playing Zelda and I'm trying to memorize how to get from one place to the other place, I'm not going to rename the notes on the map. And it's even easier than a map because it's in a circle. It's in a block format. So I can only go distance clockwise or counterclockwise. Now there are other problems because I can go counterclockwise and I can have 2 kind of units of measure in notes as well as in modal half steps. And it is possible for me to go over an octave. What would that mean? If I go from this 2 to this 5, I can go 1, 2, 3 continents up, 3 modal half steps, or I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I went around the block and back there again. So I could name that as just the local distance, 1, 2, 3, give me the flavor. Or I could say that the actual visualization is that there's a combination of a number line, a notes number line that goes up to infinity, down to infinity, and a clock format. So this, you can imagine this popping up in a 3D format, so it repeats going around in a circle, but it also has distance as it goes up and down pitch-wise in an infinite way. So it's a little bit more difficult that way, but again, that's the visualization that we want to basically have on the fretboard.